And happy Monday to everybody. As we begin a new week in the Psalms, we want to begin by thinking about God's relationship to his creation. Throughout Christian history, there has been two primary ways to think about God and his relationship to creation. Some Christian thinkers have emphasized God's transcendence. And when we think about God's transcendence, we are thinking about God being distinct from his creation. We're thinking about God being above his creation. We're thinking about God being sovereign over all of his creation. It's almost this image of God standing outside his created universe and looking down over everything that's happening and having a full and complete knowledge and control of everything that's going on. That is God's transcendence. But other Christian thinkers throughout history have emphasized a different aspect of God's relationship to his creation. They have emphasized God's immanence. And when we think of God's immanence, we think of God coming close. We think of Christmas morning, and we think of celebrating the birth of Jesus Christ, who is God in the flesh. That in that little baby, God comes close to his creation. God actually becomes a part of his creation to walk with us, to experience that which we experience, to truly enter our world. You can see how these are two different ways of thinking of God's relationship to his creation. God is above and beyond every aspect of his creation, or God is intimately close to his creation. I wonder, what do you think? When you think of God's relationship to his creation, when you think of God's relationship with you, which one do you tend to emphasize? God's transcendence or God's immanence? You know, as Christians, we have to hold both of these things together at the same time. We do believe that in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, that he is above and beyond his creation, that everything created is wholly dependent upon him, and God is separate, distinct, sovereign over all of it. But we also have to emphasize that God does not remain distant from his creation. Rather, God enters his creation through his son, Jesus Christ. And because of that, this transcendent God walked among us, understands us, and knows us. Two beautiful ways of understanding God's relationship to his creation. And at different times in our lives, we need to emphasize different things. Sometimes we need to hear about the God who is above and beyond and in control. And sometimes we need to be comforted with the God who is close, who knows us and understands us. Well, I'm going to encourage you to read Psalm 29 today. Psalm 29 is a praise psalm, and it's a praise psalm for God's transcendence. It's a praise psalm for acknowledging that God is above and beyond and sovereign over his creation. It begins with a call to worship. Ascribe to the Lord, you heavenly beings. Ascribe to the Lord glory and strength. Ascribe to the Lord the glory due his name. Worship the Lord in the splendor of his holiness. You can even see by the adjectives that are used in this description of God and calling us to worship God's glory and his holiness, which specifically speaks of him being distinct and separate from his creation. And then the next major section has this recurring phrase, the voice of the Lord. And it's a phrase that speaks to God's greatness. It speaks to God's power, and it speaks to God's sovereignty. And it really frequently uses the image of a great forest. You know, one of the places that I've never been that I really, really want to go to are the sequoia forests or the redwood forests on the West Coast. I really want to drive through and walk through these forests and see these massive trees, these majestic trees that are so tall and so wide. Those are a picture of strength. Those are a picture of perseverance. When we are in a situation like that, we realize how small we truly are, because this is just a glorious aspect of creation. Well, there were trees in Lebanon that had that similar effect to people in the ancient Near East. And so this part of the psalm is going to use that forest imagery, taking one of the grandest aspects of creation and saying God is even bigger than that. Let me just read a few verses. Verse 3, the voice of the Lord is over the waters. The God of glory thunders. The Lord thunders over the mighty waters. The voice of the Lord is powerful. The voice of the Lord is majestic. The voice of the Lord breaks the cedars. The Lord breaks in pieces the cedars of Lebanon. There's that forest imagery, that these tall and amazing and beautiful trees, God is so powerful, he can just break them. And then at the end, in verse 9, the voice of the Lord twists the oaks and strips the forest bare, and in his temple all cry glory. It's a picture of the greatness and the power and the majesty of our God. I'll encourage you to read the rest of Psalm 29 for yourself, but it's a beautiful picture. It's a beautiful call to praise for God, his transcendence over his creation. And again, sometimes we need that. And maybe in a challenging and difficult and unknown and divided time like today, we need a word of comfort that God is transcendent over it all, that God is sovereign over it all. Of course, as you go throughout this week, don't forget that our transcendent God comes close. Our transcendent God comes to us and enters our world in his Son, Jesus Christ. And that too is a beautiful image.